F-33 fighter jets showed up in Ukraine and is having a complete meltdown over whether they're obsolete garbage or legitimate game changers. Poland and Slovakia dumped their entire stock of MiG-29s on Ukraine's doorstep, and immediately the argument started. One side says these Soviet relics from the 1980s are useless in modern warfare. The other side points out that Ukraine is literally begging for F-16s, which first flew in 1974. So, which airplane is actually older? Plot twist, it's the American one. This is where things get weird. Ukrainian pilots are publicly trashing the MiG-29 donations, saying they're outdated and won't make a difference. They want F-16s instead. But here's what nobody's talking about. The MiG-29 can hit Mach 2.3, which is faster than America's brand new F-35 stealth fighter. It can pull maneuvers that would rip the wings off most Western jets, and Ukraine's already flying them on missions that sound absolutely insane when you dig into what's actually happening. So, what's really going on here? Why are pilots complaining about free fighter jets that on paper have better performance specs than half of NATO's current fleet? The answer isn't about age, and it's definitely not about speed or maneuverability. It's about something most people completely miss when they're arguing about which jet is better. And when you understand what Ukrainian MiG-29s are actually doing right now, the missions they're flying, the targets they're hunting, the logistics nightmare keeping them airborne, the whole debate starts to look completely different. Because here's the thing nobody wants to admit. These jets aren't fighting the war everyone expected. There are no Top Gun dogfights. Russian Su-35s aren't dueling Ukrainian MiGs over Kyiv. Instead, Ukrainian pilots are using 40-year-old Soviet fighters to hunt Iranian kamikaze drones, intercept cruise missiles traveling at Mach 12 and intentionally bait Russian air defense systems just to map out where they're hiding. They're flying 2 or 3 missions per day from airfields that get hit by ballistic missiles every other week, burning through fuel and spare parts at rates that should be mathematically impossible to sustain, and somehow they're still in the air. The real story isn't whether the MiG-29 is too old. The real story is how Ukraine turned a fleet of jets that NATO countries literally gave away for free, aircraft that were rotting in hangars since 1993, into one of the most effective intelligence-gathering platforms in the war. And why that's making Russia absolutely furious. Ukraine started this conflict with roughly 50 operational MiG-29 Fulcrums inherited from the Soviet collapse. As of April 2023, they've lost 17 confirmed. That sounds bad until you realize they're still operating 5 full brigades of supersonic fighters, around 100 jets total. Adding 33 more isn't just helpful, it's massive. But here's where it gets interesting. Most people think fighter jets are getting blown out of the sky in dramatic dogfights, Top Gun style. That's not happening. The real threat isn't enemy pilots, it's the ground. Man-portable air defense systems, S-300 missiles, and cruise strikes are shredding aircraft on both sides. 7 Ukrainian MiG-29s were destroyed before they even took off, wiped out on the runway by Russian missile strikes. 8 more went down in various combat situations, but actual air-to-air kills? Extremely rare. Russia has lost over 70 combat aircraft using these same ground-based tactics, which is exactly why they stopped flying their advanced jets anywhere near the front lines. No air superiority means both sides are playing a completely different game than anyone expected. Ukrainian pilots keep saying they need F-16s to control the skies. Sounds reasonable until you look at the specs. The MiG-29 can hit Mach 2.3 at altitude. That's over 1,500 miles per hour. The F-35, America's newest stealth fighter, tops out around 1,200 miles per hour. The MiG is literally faster than the most advanced jet in the U.S. arsenal. So speed isn't the issue. The real difference is what these jets can see and track. The MiG-29's radar system maxes out at 120 kilometers detection range and can track 10 targets while engaging 4. Not terrible, but the upgraded F-16 uses an AESA radar that tracks 20 targets simultaneously, detects enemies at 200 kilometers, and sees in every direction, horizontal, vertical, diagonal. It's not about the airframe, it's about the electronics. Think of it like comparing a rifle with iron sights to one with a thermal scope. Both can hit the target, but one pilot knows what's coming long before the other guy even realizes he's in danger. That's the advantage Ukraine wants, and it's why they're pushing so hard for Western jets despite getting these MiG donations. The ghost of Kyiv became the first viral fighter pilot of the social media age. Within 48 hours of Russia's invasion, Twitter and TikTok exploded with grainy footage allegedly showing a lone MiG-29 pilot racking up 6 confirmed kills in the opening days of the war. The story had everything: a mysterious ace defending his homeland, dogfights over the capital, and a faceless hero the entire world could root for. Ukrainian officials initially promoted the story. International media ran with it. People designed merchandise. The problem? That specific pilot never existed. Here's what actually happened. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense posted the legend on their official Twitter account on February 24, 2022. People call him the Ghost of Kyiv. And rightly so. This UAF ace dominates the skies over our capital and country and has already become a nightmare for invading Russian aircraft. The post included a photo of a MiG-29 and claimed this single pilot had shot down 6 Russian jets in a single day. Social media went absolutely insane. Within hours, the hashtag Ghost of Kyiv was trending globally. Former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko shared what he claimed was a photo of the ghost. Turned out it was just a random pilot from 2019. The image had been lifted from old Ukrainian Air Force publicity materials. By March, aviation analysts started poking holes in the story. The claimed shoot-downs didn't match confirmed Russian losses. The combat footage being shared was pulled from Digital Combat Simulator, a flight sim video game. Multiple Ukrainian pilots had scored air-to-air kills in the opening days, but no single ace had 6. In April 2022, Ukrainian authorities admitted the ghost was a legend, a composite character representing the entire Ukrainian Air Force, not one person. But the damage to credibility was done, and Russian propaganda had a field day, calling it Western lies and Ukrainian desperation. Except the combat those stories were based on was completely real, and the actual pilots doing this work are arguably more impressive than any fictional character. Meet the guys who are actually flying these missions, starting with Major Vadym Voroshylov, callsign Karaya. This 33-year-old MiG-29 pilot from Vinnytsia became one of the most decorated combat aviators of the war, and his story is the kind of thing Hollywood couldn't write without people calling it unrealistic. On March 13, 2023, Karaya took off from an undisclosed airfield in central Ukraine for what should have been a routine air defense patrol. His mission: intercept and destroy incoming Iranian Shahid 136 kamikaze drones heading toward critical infrastructure in Kyiv. These aren't the small quadcopter drones you see hobbyists flying. The Shahid 136 is a 440-pound loitering munition with a 200-kilometer range and enough explosive power to collapse a building. Russia had been launching them in waves of 20 to 30 at a time, overwhelming Ukrainian air defenses and hitting power plants, water facilities, and residential areas. Karaya's MiG-29 was loaded with 4 R-73 heat-seeking missiles and 2 R-27 radar-guided missiles, standard loadout for air defense missions. He picked up the first group of drones on radar about 80 kilometers out, flying low and slow, at around 180 kilometers per hour. This is where things get technically insane. Heat-seeking missiles like the R-73 are designed to lock onto the thermal signature of jet engines, pushing out thousands of degrees of heat. The Shahid 136 uses a small piston engine, basically a lawn-mower motor, generating minimal infrared signature. Locking onto one is like trying to spot a candle flame from a mile away while someone's pointing a flashlight in your face. Karaya managed to lock his first R-73 onto a Shahid fired and watched the missile track perfectly direct hit. Debris scattered across the sky. He maneuvered toward the second drone, locked, fired again. Another hit, then a third, then a fourth. In less than 8 minutes, he destroyed 4 kamikaze drones. But he wasn't done. His radar warning receiver started screaming. 2 Russian cruise missiles had entered Ukrainian airspace, likely Kh-100 launched from Tu-95 bombers over the Caspian Sea. These things are supersonic, radar-evading strategic weapons designed to penetrate NATO air defenses, and Karaya was about to engage them with a 40-year-old Soviet fighter. He switched to his R-27 radar-guided missiles locked onto the first cruise missile and fired. The missile streaked away at Mach 4.5, closing the distance in seconds. Impact. The cruise missile disintegrated mid-flight. Karaya immediately locked onto the second cruise missile and fired his last, R-27, another direct hit. In a single sortie, this guy had destroyed 5 kamikaze drones and 2 cruise missiles, 7 kills in under 15 minutes. Then, as he was banking back toward base, debris from one of the Shahid drones he'd shot down earlier, still falling through the air, slammed directly into his MiG's left engine. The impact was catastrophic. The engine exploded, sending shrapnel through the fuel lines and hydraulics. Karaya's cockpit filled with smoke. His controls stopped responding. The jet started tumbling. He had maybe 6 seconds to decide, try to save the aircraft or eject. He pulled the ejection handle. The canopy blew off, the rocket seat fired, and Karaya was launched into freezing air at 8,000 meters altitude. His parachute deployed, and he landed in a field near Zhytomyr, bruised and half-deaf but alive. Ukrainian ground forces picked him up 20 minutes later. The MiG-29 crashed in an empty field. Total loss. Ukraine awarded him the Order of Bohdan Khmelnytsky, one of the country's highest military honors. He was back in the cockpit within 2 weeks. That's the kind of missions Ukrainian MiG-29 pilots are actually flying, not glamorous dogfights, but high-stakes intercept missions against targets their jets were never designed to engage. And Karaya isn't the only one pulling off these kinds of operations. Another pilot, call sign Juice, became semi-famous on Ukrainian military social media for his TikTok videos filmed from the cockpit of his MiG-29. One of his most popular videos shows his helmet-mounted targeting system locking onto a Russian helicopter from 12 kilometers away. The video is shot from the pilot's perspective, showing the heads-up display with range, altitude, target tracking, and missile lock indicators. You can hear Juice breathing heavily, the roar of the engines, the chirp of the missile lock tone. He fires an R-73. The missile drops from the wing, ignites, and rockets toward the target. 5 seconds later, boom, the helicopter disintegrates. Juice calmly says good morning in Ukrainian, banks the MiG, and heads back to base. The video has over 2 million views. Then there's the story of an unnamed Ukrainian MiG-29 pilot who managed to shoot down a Russian Su-25 ground attack jet using nothing but his 30mm cannon. Air-to-air cannon kills are extraordinarily rare in modern combat. Most fighter engagements happen beyond visual range with guided missiles. But this pilot got into a low-altitude furball with the Russian Su-25 over the Donbass region, exhausted his missile loadout trying to hit the heavily armored jet, and ended up in a turning fight at less than 500 meters altitude. He managed to get on the Su-25 6 o'clock, close to within 400 meters, and opened fire with his GSH-30-1 cannon. Remember, he only had 150 rounds. He fired a 3-second burst, roughly 75 rounds, and stitched the Su-25 from tail to cockpit. The Russian jet went down trailing fire. The Ukrainian pilot returned to base with 25 rounds left. These kinds of engagements are being documented in real time through helmet cam footage, cockpit recordings, and even civilian smartphones from the ground. One particularly wild piece of footage shows a Ukrainian MiG-29 flying at treetop level, maybe 50 meters off the deck, screaming over a highway at full afterburner. Cars are pulling over. People are filming. The MiG disappears over the horizon, and 10 seconds later you hear the dull thump of an explosion. The pilot had just launched a missile at a Russian position and was egressing at maximum speed to avoid ground fire. The telegram post from the person who filmed it said, "I thought it was going to hit the road. Loudest thing I've ever heard." The psychological aspect of these missions can't be overstated. These pilots are flying 1 or 2 sorties per day, every single day, with no rotation and no breaks except for maintenance groundings. The average NATO fighter pilot flies maybe 1 combat mission per week during active operations. Ukrainian MiG-29 pilots are sustaining a tempo that would be considered unsustainable by Western standards, and they've been doing it for over a year. The mental and physical toll is severe. Interviews with Ukrainian pilots reveal they're dealing with chronic sleep deprivation, stress injuries, and the constant knowledge that their airfields could be hit by ballistic missiles at any moment. One pilot described the routine: wake up at 0400, pre-flight briefing at 0430, first sortie at 0500, land, refuel, rearm, second sortie by 0800. If there's no mechanical issue, a third sortie by noon. Then maintenance checks, debriefing, mission planning for the next day, sleep by 2200 if they're lucky. Repeat. Every day. For months. One of the MiG-29 squadron commanders admitted in an interview that pilot fatigue is becoming a serious operational risk. "We've had pilots fall asleep in the cockpit during return flights," he said, "not because they're lazy, because they're exhausted." And here's the part that makes the whole situation even more insane. Ukrainian MiG-29 pilots are hunting drones and cruise missiles with weapons that were never designed for that mission. The R-73 heat-seeking missile has a minimum engagement range of about 300 meters and a maximum range of 30 kilometers. It's designed to lock onto fighter jets, bombers, and helicopters, targets with massive heat signatures. The Shahed 136 drone's piston engine produces maybe 1/10 the infrared signature of a jet engine. Ukrainian pilots have had to develop entirely new tactics to make these kills possible. One technique involves flying above the drone, diving toward it to build closure speed, and firing the R-73 from less than 2 kilometers away, while the missile seeker is pointed almost directly at the target. This maximizes the missile's chance of acquiring the weak heat signature. Another technique is to use the MiG's radar to guide the pilot visually close enough to the drone to engage it with cannon fire, except that means closing to within 1,000 meters of a flying bomb that could detonate on impact. Several Ukrainian pilots have been forced to eject after drone debris struck their aircraft during these engagements, just like Karaya. The Russian response to these Ukrainian MiG-29 intercept missions has been to start launching Shahed drones in larger swarms and at lower altitudes, sometimes as low as 50 meters above the ground. This forces Ukrainian pilots to fly dangerously low to engage them, putting the MiG-29s at risk from not just the drones, but also from Russian man-portable air defense systems and even small arms fire from the ground. One Ukrainian pilot reported taking rifle rounds through his vertical stabilizer during a low-altitude intercept mission. The jet made it back to base. Barely. There's also the issue of ammunition sustainability. Each MiG-29 sortie typically expends at least 2 missiles. If a pilot is flying 2 sorties per day, that's 4 missiles per day per aircraft. Multiply that by 100 operational MiG-29s, and Ukraine is burning through 400 air-to-air missiles per day during heavy combat operations. Even with domestic production of R-73 missiles, that rate of expenditure is unsustainable. This is one of the reasons Ukraine has been so desperate for additional aircraft and Western munitions. They're running out of missiles faster than they can replace them. The social media aspect of Ukrainian MiG-29 operations is also worth noting because it's being used as both a morale tool and an information warfare weapon. Videos of successful intercepts, dramatic cockpit footage, and pilot interviews are regularly posted to official Ukrainian military accounts, Telegram channels, and Twitter. This serves multiple purposes. It boosts Ukrainian civilian morale, demonstrates to Western allies that their support is being used effectively, and sends a message to Russia that Ukrainian air defenses are still operational and dangerous. But it's also creating a weird dynamic where some Ukrainian pilots are becoming semi-celebrities. Call signs like Juice Karaya and Moonfish have thousands of followers. People send them messages, fan art, and even marriage proposals. One pilot joked in an interview that he has more Instagram followers than his wife, and she's not happy about it. The Ukrainian Air Force has had to implement social media guidelines to prevent pilots from accidentally revealing operational information through their posts. One pilot got reprimanded for posting a selfie that showed a flight board in the background with mission details visible. Compare this to Russian fighter pilots, who are under strict orders not to post anything on social media and whose identities are largely kept classified. The Russian Ministry of Defense occasionally releases heavily edited propaganda footage of Su-35s and Su-57s conducting missions, but it's sterile, staged, and rarely shows actual combat. Ukrainian MiG-29 pilots are out here posting helmet cam footage of missile intercepts with Linkin Park playing in the background. It's a completely different approach to information warfare, and it's arguably been more effective at shaping international perception. The legend of the ghost of Kyiv might have been debunked, but the real stories coming out of Ukrainian MiG-29 squadrons are somehow even more compelling. These aren't fictional aces with impossible kill counts. They're exhausted, overworked pilots flying outdated jets with limited weapons against targets they were never designed to engage, and they're somehow making it work through a combination of skill, desperation, and tactics that would make Cold War strategists scratch their heads in confusion. That's the reality of Ukraine's MiG-29 operations, and it's a hell of a lot more interesting than any propaganda legend. When Slovakia agreed to send their MiG-29s to Ukraine, reports started circulating about sabotage. Mechanics working on the aircraft, some of them Russian contractors, allegedly tampered with critical systems. The Slovak defense minister launched a full investigation, and people started asking the obvious question: why were Russian civilians allowed anywhere near fighter jets being sent to fight Russians? The investigation concluded there was no evidence of deliberate sabotage, but the problems were very real. One engine that should have lasted 350 hours failed after just 78. These weren't freshly maintained combat aircraft. They'd been sitting in storage since 1993. Decades of neglect meant corroded parts, outdated components, and systems that barely functioned. Ukraine had to completely overhaul them before they could fly combat missions. They're adding Rockwell Collins navigation systems, secure communications, IFF transponders to prevent friendly fire incidents, new cockpit computers, and LCD displays. Basically turning a Game Boy into a Game Boy Advance. But even with upgrades, these jets have serious limitations, which is exactly why the F-16 debate keeps coming up. The MiG-29 has one weapon most people don't know about, a 30mm autocannon mounted just left of the cockpit. Unlike most fighter cannons that use rotary Gatling mechanisms, this thing uses a short recoil action. Sounds technical, but here's what it means. The gun is lighter and smaller, but it only carries 100 rounds. The F-16's 20mm cannon holds 5 times more ammo. At 1,500 rounds per minute, A MiG pilot gets 4 seconds of trigger time before going dry. 4 seconds. The barrel itself only lasts 2,000 rounds before needing replacement, which means 80 seconds of total firing before the whole system needs rebuilding. It runs so hot that the jet uses a gas cooling system to cool it down, literally evaporating water as it fires. And if the gun jams, the MiG uses a small explosive charge to blow a steel bolt through the stuck round, igniting the powder and clearing the barrel. Russian problems require Russian solutions. But ammunition logistics matter more than most people realize. Ukraine already manufactures S-125 and R-73 missiles domestically. They have production facilities cranking out MiG-compatible weapons right now. Switching to F-16s means building an entirely new supply chain for American munitions, which U.S. officials estimate would take 18 months minimum. Here's what nobody talks about when they're debating F-16s versus MiG-29s. How Ukraine is actually using these jets on a day-to-day basis, and it's nothing like what anyone expected. Forget the dramatic dogfights and Top Gun fantasies. Ukrainian MiG-29s are flying missions that sound boring on paper, but are absolutely critical to how this war is actually being fought. They're functioning as high-speed reconnaissance platforms, electronic warfare detection systems, and mobile radar stations that happen to have missiles attached. And the logistics behind keeping these aircraft operational is so insane that it makes the actual flying look easy by comparison. Let's start with reconnaissance, because this is where the MiG-29 is earning its keep in ways most people don't realize. Ukrainian pilots are flying what they call electronic scouting missions, basically taking off, flying toward the front lines until their radar warning receivers start going crazy, then mapping out every Russian radar signature, electronic warfare system, and air defense position they can detect before turning around and getting the hell out. They're not trying to engage. They're not dropping bombs. They're collecting intelligence that ground forces physically cannot gather any other way. Here's how it works. A MiG-29 takes off from a concealed airfield and flies at medium altitude, around 5,000 to 7,000 meters, toward known Russian positions. The pilot has his radar warning receiver active, which is constantly scanning for enemy radar emissions. The moment Russian air defense systems like the S-300 or S-400 start tracking him, the RWR lights up with specific signatures that identify exactly what type of system is painting him. Different radars produce different frequencies and pulse patterns. It's like a fingerprint. An S-300 system has a completely different signature than a Panzer S-1 or a Tor M2. The MiG's avionics automatically log these signatures, timestamp them, and record the bearing and approximate range. But here's where it gets really interesting. The concentration and type of air defense systems tell Ukrainian intelligence exactly what Russia is trying to protect. If a pilot picks up 3 S-300 batteries, 2 Panzer systems, and multiple Tor units all clustered in a 10-kilometer radius, that's not random. That's Russians protecting something valuable, a command post, an ammunition depot, a concentration of artillery, or a staging area for a major offensive. Ukrainian military intelligence then correlates this electronic signature data with satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and reports from ground reconnaissance units to build a complete picture of Russian defensive positions. One Ukrainian MiG-29 pilot, call-sign physicist, described one of these missions in an interview with a Ukrainian defense publication. He took off from an airfield in central Ukraine, flew east toward Donetsk, and intentionally provoked Russian air defenses by entering contested airspace. Within minutes, his radar warning receiver was screaming with multiple lock-ons, S-300 systems, S-400 systems, Buk M3 batteries, even older S-125 systems still in Russian service. He recorded everything, turned around before any missiles were actually launched, and returned to base. The intelligence team analyzed the data and determined that Russia had moved at least 6 battalion-level air defense units into that sector within the previous 72 hours. That told Ukrainian commanders that Russia was preparing for a major ground offensive in that area and was pre-positioning air defenses to protect their advancing forces. Ukraine used that intelligence to preemptively move HIMARS artillery systems into firing range and hit 3 of those air defense positions before the Russian offensive even started. When Russian Su-25 ground attack jets tried to provide close air support for the offensive, they got shredded by Ukrainian air defenses because their protective bubble had already been collapsed. The offensive stalled, all because one MiG-29 pilot flew close enough to get radar locked and lived to tell about it. These reconnaissance missions are extraordinarily dangerous because the line between gathering intelligence and getting shot down is measured in seconds and kilometers. Russian S-400 systems have an effective range of 400 kilometers against aircraft. The missiles themselves travel at some Mach 12 like. If a Ukrainian pilot pushes too deep into contested airspace, he's got maybe 30 seconds for missile launch to impact. Ukrainian MiG-29 pilots have developed a technique they call poking the bear, flying just close enough to activate Russian radars, then immediately diving to low altitude and egressing at maximum speed while dumping chaff and flares. It works most of the time. Not always. One pilot, call sign Lemon, was flying one of these electronic reconnaissance missions near Mariupol when a Russian S-400 battery fired 2 missiles at him from 70 kilometers away. His radar warning receiver gave him 15 seconds of warning. He immediately pushed the nose down into a dive, dropped from 6,000 meters to 500 meters in less than 20 seconds, and started flying nap of the earth, literally 50 meters above the ground. While his RWR screamed continuously, the missiles lost lock when he dropped below the radar horizon, but he had to fly for another 40 kilometers at treetop level before he felt safe enough to climb back to altitude. He said the whole experience aged him 5 years. Now, let's talk about the logistics nightmare that is keeping these jets operational, because this is where things get absolutely chaotic. Ukraine has somewhere between 80 and 100 operational MiG-29s spread across 5 brigades. These aircraft need fuel, ammunition, spare parts, maintenance, and secure airfields to operate from. Russia knows where most of Ukraine's major airfields are because they're the same ones the Soviet Air Force used for decades. Ukraine cannot keep their jets parked at these locations because they will get hit by cruise missiles or ballistic missiles. So, Ukrainian MiG-29s are constantly moving between airfields, sometimes operating from civilian airports, highway strips, or hastily prepared dispersal bases that didn't exist 3 months ago. This concept is called dispersed operations, and NATO has been training for it since the Cold War, but Ukraine is doing it at a scale and pace that's unprecedented. A MiG-29 squadron will operate from one airfield for 2 or 3 days, then pack up everything, ground crew, fuel trucks, maintenance equipment, spare parts, ammunition, and move to a completely different location 50 or 100 kilometers away. Then they do it again. And again. Ukrainian MiG-29s have operated from at least 30 different airfields since the war started, including some locations that weren't even designated military airfields before 2022. The fuel consumption alone is staggering. A MiG-29 burns through approximately 3,000 kilograms of fuel per hour at full afterburner and around 1,800 kilograms per hour during normal flight. A typical combat sortie: take off, fly to the operational area, conduct the mission, return to base, takes about 90 minutes and burns roughly 2,700 kilograms of fuel. If a single MiG-29 is flying 2 sorties per day, that's 5,400 kilograms of fuel. Multiply that by 100 aircraft, and Ukraine is burning through 540,000 kilograms, 540 metric tons, of jet fuel per day just to keep their MiG-29 fleet operational. That's not even counting Su-24s, Su-25s, helicopters, or transport aircraft. Ukraine is producing some jet fuel domestically, but nowhere near enough to sustain this operational tempo. They're importing fuel from Poland, Romania, and other NATO partners, and it's being trucked in on civilian tankers that have to navigate bombed-out roads and avoid Russian reconnaissance to reach dispersed airfields. One Ukrainian logistics officer described it as the world's most dangerous fuel delivery service. Several fuel convoys have been hit by Russian strikes, and there have been incidents where MiG-29s had to land at alternate airfields because their primary base ran out of fuel mid-operation. Maintenance is an even bigger problem. The MiG-29's engines, two Klimov RD-33 turbofans, are rated for 4,000 hours of operation before requiring a complete overhaul. That sounds like a lot until you realize Ukrainian MiG-29s are flying 180 to 200 hours per month during heavy combat operations. That means each engine needs a major overhaul every 20 months, and Ukraine is operating 100 jets. They're cycling engines through overhaul facilities at a rate that's pushing Ukrainian maintenance capacity to the absolute limit. Worse, many of the MiG-29s Ukraine received from Poland and Slovakia had been sitting in storage for 20 years. These jets need extensive refurbishment before they're even combat capable. Hydraulic lines have corroded. Avionics have degraded. Ejection seats are past their certified service life. Ukrainian maintenance crews are working 18-hour days trying to get these donated jets into flyable condition while simultaneously maintaining the existing fleet that's being flown into the ground. One Ukrainian aircraft mechanic posted on Telegram that his team had been working on the same MiG-29 for 6 weeks straight, trying to diagnose an electrical fault that kept causing radar failures. They finally traced it to corroded wiring in the nose cone that had been deteriorating since the 1990s. Let's talk about airfield security, because this is where Ukraine's disadvantages compared to Russia become really obvious. Russia can park their Su-35s and Su-57s at airbases deep inside Russian territory, hundreds of kilometers from the front lines, completely safe from Ukrainian attack. When they want to fly a mission, the jets take off, fly to the operational area, conduct the mission, and return to their secure bases. Ukrainian MiG-29s don't have that luxury. Every airfield in Ukraine is within range of Russian cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, or long-range strike aircraft. Ukraine has lost at least 7 MiG-29s destroyed on the ground, and probably more that haven't been publicly confirmed. The worst single incident happened on March 12, 2022, when Russian-caliber cruise missiles hit Vasilkiv Air Base, just south of Kyiv. Ukrainian forces managed to shoot down several of the incoming missiles, but at least 3 got through and hit the airfield. 2 MiG-29s were destroyed outright. A third was heavily damaged and had to be written off. Fuel storage tanks were hit, triggering a massive fire that took 6 hours to extinguish. The runway was cratered and remained non-operational for 11 days. Ukrainian air defense managed to shoot down a Russian Su-25 that tried to hit the base with follow-up strikes, but the damage was already done. A second major attack hit Ivano-Frankivsk Air Base on April 18, 2022. Russian sources claimed they launched 6 Iskander-M ballistic missiles at the facility. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted 4, but 2 got through. The impacts destroyed at least 3 MiG-29s and damaged a 4th. The attack also hit a maintenance hangar, killing 2 ground crew members and injuring 7 more. This attack was particularly significant because Ivano-Frankivsk is in western Ukraine, over 200 kilometers from the nearest Russian position. It demonstrated that nowhere in Ukraine is truly safe from Russian strikes. Ukraine's response has been to essentially turn their entire air force into a nomadic operation. MiG-29s are parked in reinforced aircraft shelters when available, but More often they're dispersed in revetments, under camouflage netting, or even hidden in forests near highways that can be used as emergency runways. Ukrainian engineers have gotten very good at rapidly repairing runway damage. There are reports of cratered runways being patched and back in operation within 12 hours using prefabricated concrete sections and asphalt quick patch systems. One particularly clever Ukrainian tactic involves using decoy aircraft. They've built full-scale MiG-29 mock-ups out of wood, metal sheeting, and inflatable structures, and they park these decoys in areas where Russian reconnaissance satellites can spot them. Russia has wasted cruise missiles and attack sorties hitting these fake jets. One Russian telegram channel celebrated the destruction of 5 Ukrainian MiG-29s at an airfield near Poltava, posting satellite imagery showing the burning wreckage. Ukrainian sources later confirmed all 5 were decoys. Russia had just spent approximately $6 million in cruise missiles to destroy plywood and canvas. The constant airfield hopping has created a whole separate logistical nightmare for ground crews and support personnel. A typical MiG-29 squadron doesn't just consist of pilots and jets. There are aircraft mechanics, avionics technicians, armament specialists, fuelers, logistics coordinators, security personnel, and command staff. Moving an entire squadron means moving 200 to 300 people plus all their equipment. Ukraine has developed mobile maintenance units based on heavy trucks that carry diagnostic equipment, spare parts, tools, and even portable clean rooms for avionics work. These units follow the jets wherever they go, setting up temporary bases that can be operational within 6 hours and packed up and moved again in less than 4. One Ukrainian ground crew chief described the routine in an interview. They get orders to move, usually with less than 12 hours notice. Everything gets packed into trucks, tools, spare parts, personal gear, everything. The convoy drives through the night to the new location, often taking circuitous routes to avoid Russian surveillance. They arrive at dawn, set up camouflage netting, establish a maintenance area, refuel the jets that are already inbound, and are expected to be ready for combat operations by midday. Then they do it all over again 3 days later. The human cost of this operational tempo is severe. Ground crews are working 16 to 18-hour days, 7 days a week, with no rotation and no breaks. Several Ukrainian aircraft mechanics have been killed in Russian strikes on airfields. They were working on jets when the missiles hit. There have been cases of mechanics falling asleep under aircraft they're working on because they literally cannot stay awake any longer. One Ukrainian Air Force officer admitted in an interview that maintenance error rates have increased significantly due to crew fatigue, and they've had incidents where improperly installed components or skipped inspection steps have caused mechanical failures during flight. Now, let's talk about how these MiG-29s are actually supporting ground operations, because this is where the intelligence gathering really pays off. Ukrainian MiG-29s aren't conducting close air support missions the way Western air forces would, flying low and slow, dropping precision bombs on enemy positions. That's a suicide mission in an environment where both sides have extensive man-portable air defense systems. Instead, Ukrainian jets are flying high-altitude missions, using their radar and electronic sensors to detect Russian troop concentrations, artillery positions, and supply convoys, then relaying that information to Ukrainian ground forces in real time. This is called sensor fusion, and it's turning the MiG-29 into an airborne forward observer. A jet takes off, flies a patrol route along the front lines at 8,000 meters altitude, high enough to be relatively safe for most man-portable systems, and uses its radar to scan for ground targets. Modern ground mapping modes on upgraded MiG-29 radars can detect vehicles, artillery pieces, and even individual tanks at ranges up to 40 kilometers. The pilot marks these targets in his system, and the data is automatically transmitted via secure data link to Ukrainian artillery units on the ground. Ukrainian HIMARS operators have specifically mentioned that some of their most successful strikes came from targeting data provided by MiG-29s. One HIMARS crew commander said they received coordinates for a Russian ammunition depot from a MiG-29 that had detected unusual vehicle activity in the area. The HIMARS crew fired a 6-rocket strike based on those coordinates. Post-strike reconnaissance showed they'd hit a Russian 152mm artillery ammunition stockpile. The resulting explosions destroyed the entire depot and damaged or destroyed 17 Russian vehicles parked nearby. Total mission time from MiG-29 detection to HIMARS impact, 11 minutes. Ukrainian MiG-29s are also conducting what NATO calls armed reconnaissance missions, flying with a full weapons load, not necessarily intending to engage, but ready to hit targets of opportunity if they present themselves. These missions are rare because of the air defense threat, but they happen. In June 2022, a Ukrainian MiG-29 pilot spotted a Russian convoy of supply trucks moving along a highway near Kherson. The convoy was outside the range of Ukrainian artillery and moving too fast for ground forces to intercept. The pilot was carrying 4 FAB 250-250-kilogram unguided bombs. He came in at low altitude, dropped all 4 bombs in a single pass, and egressed before Russian air defenses could react. Ukrainian drone footage later confirmed he'd hit at least 3 trucks and blocked the highway with burning vehicles. But these kinds of strikes are the exception, not the rule. The reality is that Ukrainian MiG-29s are spending most of their time doing things that don't make for dramatic videos, flying patrol routes, gathering electronic intelligence, occasionally intercepting drones, and trying not to get shot down. It's grinding, exhausting work with minimal glory and maximum risk. The difference between Ukrainian and Russian air operations is stark. Russia flies maybe 40 to 60 combat sorties per day across the entire front line, and most of those are strike missions from Russian territory, launching standoff weapons from safe distances. Ukraine is flying a similar number of sorties, but with a fraction of the aircraft, meaning each Ukrainian jet is flying 2 or 3 times as often as its Russian counterpart. Ukrainian pilots are accumulating combat flight hours at a rate that's unprecedented in modern air warfare. Several Ukrainian MiG-29 pilots have logged over 300 combat hours since the war started. For comparison, a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot might accumulate 300 combat hours over an entire 20-year career. The sustainability question is becoming critical. Ukrainian MiG-29s are not just flying a lot, they're being flown hard. Aggressive maneuvering, repeated afterburner usage, low-altitude high-speed flight, and constant maximum weight takeoffs are putting stress on airframes that were designed for a much gentler operational profile. Ukraine has already had to ground several MiG-29s due to structural fatigue cracks in wings and fuselage sections. These aircraft have exceeded their design service life, and Ukrainian engineers are having to make difficult decisions about whether to keep flying them and risk catastrophic structural failure or ground them and reduce operational capacity. This is exactly why those 33 replacement MiG-29s from Poland and Slovakia matter so much. They're not just adding to Ukraine's numbers, they're providing aircraft that can be rotated into service while older jets are pulled back for depot-level maintenance and structural repairs. It's the difference between flying the same 100 jets until they literally fall apart versus having enough aircraft to maintain operational tempo while conducting proper maintenance. Not exciting, not glamorous, but absolutely critical. The ground game, the logistics, the maintenance, the airfield security, the intelligence gathering, the crew fatigue, the fuel shortages, the spare parts challenges. This is what's actually determining Ukraine's air combat effectiveness. Not the performance specs of the MiG-29 versus the F-16. Not the theoretical capabilities of Western versus Soviet technology. The unsexy, unglamorous reality of keeping jets flying pilots alive and intelligence flowing to the units that need it. And by that measure, Ukraine is performing absolute miracles with equipment that was supposed to be obsolete 20 years ago. The MiG-29 entered service in 1983 with the Soviet Air Force. 40 years later, it's still flying combat missions, just like the AK-47 and T-72 tank, Soviet designs that refuse to disappear. The modern version costs about $23 million, making it one of the cheapest fourth-generation fighters available. It weighs 24,000 pounds empty, 32,000 with fuel, leaving 8,000 pounds for weapons. The F-16 has 15,000 pounds of payload capacity, nearly double. The MiG climbs at 330 meters per second and hits 1,520 miles per hour at altitude. It has a thrust-to-weight ratio of 1.07, meaning it produces more thrust than weight, allowing for near-vertical climbs and high-angle attack turns. It can even pull off the Cobra maneuver, that wild stunt from Top Gun where the jet flips nose up mid-flight. But none of this changes the fact that when MiG-29s faced NATO jets in Desert Storm, Iraqi pilots got obliterated. Every engagement ended in retreat, being shot down, or crashing. That's the record Ukraine is trying to overcome. They've adapted by integrating American AGM-88 HARM missiles onto Russian airframes, which required completely rewriting software in 2 different languages and building custom hardware to make a U.S. weapon talk to a Soviet jet. It's like forcing an iPhone charger to work on an Android by inventing a new cable and operating system from scratch. Ukraine is making it work because they have to. The question isn't whether the MiG-29 is outdated. It obviously is. The question is whether 33 more jets, right now, matter more than waiting 18 months for F-16s that might cross Putin's so-called red line. And based on how Ukraine's using them, the answer is becoming pretty clear.